Jose, tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you play high school basketball at?
Okay, so I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. It's a little city outside of Toronto, Canada, maybe like an hour away. And I grew up there. I played high school basketball there. And then after high school, what happened was I originally went on as a walk-on to a university, nearby university. It's called the University of Waterloo. And went there as a walk-on. And I'm just going to give you a bit of a background on my whole basketball journey. Yeah. So I went there. I played for a little bit, but I quit because I was redshirting actually. So coming out of high school, I wasn't highly recruited. Even though I had good stats coming out of high school, I played in a small conference, a small like division. So it wasn't really worth much to recruiters or I guess to colleges. And back then too, I wasn't really keen on everything that I'm doing right now, like putting on the highlight tapes, messaging coaches, how do I get in contact with them? I didn't know any of this stuff, right? So I had no mentors, nothing. So I went to college, went on as a walk-on, and then after a few months I quit because I was a redshirt. And I said, I'm not feeling this. And I thought for then I was done with basketball. I thought for sure I was done with basketball. But eventually what happened was I just wanted to get back into the game and I just loved the game too much. So eventually what happened was I started putting on my mixtapes more. I got a coach who actually helped me put together a few highlights. And then from there, I got recruited to a university in British Columbia, Canada. It's in Vancouver. And and then I played 4 years out in BC. And it was also a very small school, but it was the only offer I had. So that was the only thing that I could take. So I just took it and I ran with it. And that's basically more or less like the journey that I had through basketball.
Wow. So basically like the foundation for your pro career, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but like the foundation of who you were, your resiliency, your perseverance, it kind of sounds like it was built in that time. Am I right or wrong? Am I, off a little bit? Like correct me if I'm missing it.
Yeah, most definitely, because that's something that I kind of take a bit of pride in too, is being like that underdog my whole career. Because even coming out of high school, even I didn't even have any looks, let alone going from college to the pros. So that's something that really I've carried on with me, and that's why I try to tell players too, like you got to be your own biggest cheerleader, you got to be your own biggest fan, you got to be your own biggest recruiter. You got to help yourself out. Sure, if someone helps you out in the end, it'll be great, but you've got to help yourself out. And that's something that I've kind of improved on as I gotten older and older, because at the start, like I'm saying, I came out of high school with no mentors, no guidance, no mentorship, nothing. So that's definitely something that I've carried with myself.
Love that, bro. Love that. So, okay, talk about then your collegiate career, because obviously I would say in order to be a professional, you have to dominate, the level before that. So, I've read of some of your successes. Can you share just how that metamorphosis took place, right? From high school, you're under recruited, to then redshirting and then figuring it out in college.
Yeah, it's so crazy because when I went to college, like I went to a super small college division. It's called the Pac West in BC. And like I would say I killed it there. I did well. I was the all-time leading scorer in our university's history. I think in the conference I was third all time in scoring. So I came there and did really well. But coming out of there, it's like what I say to a lot of players. When you come out of these really small divisions and really small conferences, it's really tough. It's going to be really tough for you. That's why everything else has to be on point when you're trying to make it to the pros. So I came out, and the way that I actually got into professional basketball was through a connection who he had previously played with the national team of El Salvador. So this was like the big link of how I was able to get my foot in the door playing professionally, because he had played for the El Salvador national team, and he knew the coaches down there in El Salvador, and we played in the same conference in BC. So we were like peers. We knew of each other, and I just asked them, and I said, "Hey, I know that you play for the national team. I'm wondering if you have any connections or if you have any contacts that I could reach out to. I'll be looking to play there too." And my big kind of ace in the hole was that I was half Salvadorian. My dad's Salvadorian and my mom is Canadian. So I used that to my advantage. And that's how I kind of got my foot in the door, was being a national first. And then once you get your foot in the door and you prove yourself, then that's when these other opportunities started opening up for me in my career. But that was the big thing I would say from my college was that one, if you go to a small college, you really gotta do well and have good stats or have good accolades if you're going to a small college. And another thing that could really increase your employability would be that if you have the passport too, if you have the passport to some region where you can basically play as a national or what's known as like a local or a home league where you can just play as a local, then that's going to be huge for you. So that's what I would say would be like the two biggest things, what happened to me and how I was able to like turn a small college experience into actual professional experience.
Love that. You're already dropping so many gems. So before you go beyond what we just shared, can you unpack that dual citizenship, that passport for maybe some players who are not, aware of their ancestry, or maybe they don't have, the ability to just easily identify what type of citizenship they could apply for?
Definitely. So this is like the crux, the biggest thing in overseas basketball is this, that unlike the NBA or unlike a college roster, the NBA, when you have, let's say you have 12 players on a roster, it's just the 12 best players. It doesn't matter if they're Slovenian, Bosnian, American, Canadian, Jamaican, whatever they are. It doesn't matter. They just take the best in the world.
Right.
But when it comes to FIBA, those 12 players are actually under roster regulations. So depending on what country you're in, there's only going to be a certain amount of what are known as imports or foreigners. And then the rest are going to be locals, meaning people who are actually from the country where you're playing in. Now, when you get to Europe and some other countries, it gets a bit more complicated, but we'll simplify it for right now. So let's say, like in my instance, I played in El Salvador. So when I first started, I think there was 3 imports allowed per team. So 3 players who are not Salvadorian can play on any team.
Okay.
So usually it would be an American. They bring 3 Americans. Sometimes they bring Latin Americans. Sometimes they bring like Dominicans or Cubans or whatever. But the big take home was that if I got my citizenship as a national, as a Salvadorian, then I wouldn't count against that import quota. And that's huge because if you just do the math, 3 out of 12 roster spots are reserved for imports, for foreigners. Whereas if you flip it, 9 out of the 12 are reserved for a local. And then you expand that. Let's say when I first went there, there's 16 teams. So whatever the math is, 16 times 9, that's the amount of roster spots that are actually available. Versus 16 times 3, that would be the roster spots for the actual foreigner. And the thing is, if you can get your passport, no matter if you have ancestry in, sometimes it can be through your parents, right? So my dad was Salvadorian, but sometimes it can go even further. Like I know for Italians, it can go pretty far back. I think it can go to your great grandfather or your grandfather. Yeah. So and then some people, you can be just born in the country and then say you relocated somewhere else and you count as a national. Like I know a few players, they were born in Hong Kong, but then they left and I think they lived in Australia, but then now they're coming back and they're playing in the first division in Hong Kong. So that's like the huge key, is that basically with the passport, it improves your employability, it improves your chances. It's just a basic mathematical equation, meaning there's more roster spots available to you. So like that's literally like the key, the biggest key of overseas basketball, because I know that you work with so many players. You probably know like 30, 40, 50 players right now who I guarantee could play overseas. And make good money. But the thing is, they're an American, they're a foreigner, and that's the most competitive spot in overseas basketball. That's the most cutthroat in the business, because they know that if you don't produce, then there's always going to be another American out there who's good. There's always another American because there's so many good ball players. So that's the biggest thing, is that, and you sometimes it's not as convenient as like, oh, my dad's Salvadorian, okay, let me just go get it. Or my dad's Brazilian, let me go get it. Sometimes you actually got to go through the family tree and be like, okay, who were my grandparents and where were they born? And where is that lineage going to? Because sometimes it's like really through a back door like that. But yeah, long story short, that's what I would say is like the biggest key for a player to begin with.
Major key. And I'm guessing when you discovered that, like, you probably, I don't know, it's like the world probably opened up to you as far as what you could accomplish and now what possibilities you had as a rookie entering into your professional career. Talk about, all right, that's a tangible type of key that a player needs to have, right, in order to increase their chances. What about like those soft skills? Like, what are the characteristics or what's the mentality of a college graduate or an aspiring pro that you believe they need to have in order to be successful and kind of make it through that cutthroat gauntlet where it's so competitive just to get a job?
I would say if you are a smaller college player like I was, I would say one thing you have to do is really humble yourself in the beginning, because I think we'll get into this a bit later, but if you're a small college guy and you're not coming from a high major Division I program, or don't have international experience with your national team, then the salary is going to be quite low when you start. Like, for instance, I started at $700. So you can only imagine, right? The perception is when you first start in overseas basketball, it's like, man, you see the Euro League and you see the NBA and you think like overseas is similar to that, right? Because it's all professional basketball, right? You think it's all the same. But then you realize how there's such a huge scale in overseas basketball. So that would be the first key, is you actually have to humble yourself a huge amount, because you may think that you're a $5,000 player, $4,000 player, $10K player, but you may have to start out at $700. In fact, the vast majority of players, they are going to start out between that like $700 to $2,000 range.
You're talking about per month.
Yeah, per month. So that's a huge thing for players, is understanding that and being humble. The other thing I would say is the professionalism is something that really has to be honed in on, because like I said, it's so competitive. You have to understand how competitive it is. So many people want to play the game. So many people are good enough to play the game. So if you're able to zone in on being a professional, being on time, the team you're dependable, they can rely on you, you're not causing a ruckus with your teammates, you're not a bad teammate, you're not bad-mouthing other people within the organization, then they know that basically you are guaranteed not a hit, but you're guaranteed to, at least they know the baseline that you're going to give them.
Right.
So if you're a really erratic player and it's like, he may give us something real good, like an A+, or he could give us a D. They'll probably just sit in the middle and be like, okay, who's the guy who's the closest thing to like a B? And you see that in the NBA too. You see that all the time. You see guys like, I remember people really harping on someone like Jared Dudley, and they're like, yo, how's this guy at the end of the bench? And Dwight Howard's out of the NBA or something like that. Or some guy who has some sort of attitude problem, or, perception of an attitude problem. And it's for that reason a lot of times. And overseas is even more cutthroat than that, because you don't have as big of a name as those NBA guys. Obviously, you're not as known as those guys. So if I could just take away from two things, I'd say professionalism and also humbling yourself at the start of the journey would be the two biggest things.
So I guess that connects to then, like, what would you say is the biggest derailer, or the thing that just removes guys out of the equation for making it overseas, in your opinion?
In terms of on the court, I would say not understanding the play style. I'm not sure how you would classify that. Maybe like market knowledge.
Yeah.
Because different markets, different expectations, as I always say. Because when you go to, like, say you're going to Europe is very team oriented. It's very traditional basketball, system sets. You have to be smart and think your way through the game.
Yep.
Whereas if you go to somewhere like Latin America or Africa or the Middle East, it's really one-on-one, individualistic, and you got to go get buckets, or you got to go do what you do, basically. Yeah. And you got to call your own number, and it's like a lot of individual talent. And I'm not saying one play style is better than the other, but I'm just saying that's what it is, and,
right.
and that's what they expect out of you. So you have to understand that, because I know some Americans, when they'll come out of like the NCAA system as rookies, and they'll go to somewhere like the Dominican Republic. And I was just actually talking to a player about this. Like he had like, he thought he was playing well. He had like 8 points, 5 rebounds at halftime, and then the fans are shouting like, send him home in Spanish, and the coach told them like, yo, you better turn up right now, because they want to send your ass home if you don't like get 20 or 25 or 30. And sure enough, he started shooting everything, but like that's what's required in the market, right? So you have to understand beforehand what you're going into, because it is really different depending on where you land.
That's right. Yeah, we went through that. Short story, I won't take much time, but we went through that with a really prominent college player when I was in China, one of the Harrison twins, Andrew Harrison.
Yeah.
So, he's a a game manager of some sorts. He can score. He can get a bucket or two. But the dude wants to play the game the right way. That's just how he plays. And we had another guard, Joe Young, who's the opposite, just a bucket.
Yeah.
And so we thought, we could work it out throughout the season, have two guards, one come out, the other one go in. Like you said, the fans were clamoring for Harrison to go home. And he was playing solid. Like you said, 12 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds. They were like, nah, we want Joe. Joe's going to put up 40, right, and get 2 assists. And that's the understanding of the market, So I love that. Love that. I think a lot of players have never even thought of that. So let me ask you this. What are the different avenues? Because I know it's not just one way to get overseas, right? You already dropped a bomb when you talked about dual citizenship. So what are just off the top of your head, some different ways that a recent college graduate could look into breaking into that market overseas?
Yeah, I would say the citizenship or the passport would be the main one. And then obviously there's stuff like very well known, like basketball trials, overseas basketball trials. But I will say that for a lot of trials, for me personally, if I were going to go to a tryout, I would want to be in the location where the team is actually playing in. So in other words, like if I want to play in Spain, then I want to go try out in Spain for those tryouts. Because for the most part, if you're like a beginner or a rookie and you're going for a tryout, that team probably isn't going to have a lot of funding for the most part, right? So if you're going over there, then they can save on that flight and you basically just go to the tryout, you do well, they'll do the visa there, everything with you, they can get all your documentation, and then you can go to wherever you need to play or with the team, right? So I would say passport, the tryout. Another big one that I see that I think will probably be more utilized in the future will be actually attending a university overseas, because a lot of these pro leagues now, they're trying to create like a funnel system through the university system to the pros. And in Taiwan, they're actually doing that right now. So there's like some Americans who go over and they play in Taiwan, but they're in the university, they're enrolled in the university, but they can actually play. I think it's with the P League, or it might be with the T1. I forget which one it is with, but then they basically can play in the professional league afterwards, and they don't count as a foreigner. That's the crazy part, is that if you spend enough time in the country, in a lot of these countries, you'll actually be unmarked as a foreigner, even though you're American. Your whole life you've lived in the States, but you went to university there. And if you spend like 3 or 4 or 5 years there, then they'll eventually unmark you. If you went through the university system, they'll unmark you. So Taiwan is like an example of that players are doing. Another thing is like in Ireland, they do that too all the time. They'll get players, they'll pay for their masters, and then they'll go there and play overseas in Ireland, in the National League or the Super League. So I would say the passport, the tryouts, actually going over there. Some people do it through other wild ways, like they actually relocate their whole lives and they go overseas. And it's more like, okay, if I don't make it in this overseas stuff, in this hooping stuff, then I still love where I am. So like some people will go to Italy and they say, okay, I have a job here, I'm secure, I have whatever housing, I have some family here. And if I don't make it, then it's not the end of the world, because I still love Italy and I can still live here. So that would be like another way that people could do it. And now there's also drafts. There's now more leagues are starting to introduce drafts. So there's like in Costa Rica, there's a draft. In Thailand, there's a draft. In Canada, there's a draft, but you have to go through the university system. So now there's like open tryouts in that sense, that there's drafts in some of these leagues. So there's many different ways now that you can play overseas. Obviously, the most traditional one still is going to be that you send your film, you send your highlights, and it's kind of like through an agent or through cold calling, and you kind of create your opportunities in that way. But yeah, there's if you wanted to, depending on what your situation is, right? Because some guys, they don't need to do all that, right? They don't need to relocate because they're mid-major D1 guys. They can just get an agent wants them, and boom, they're gone. So it really depends on your situation and what you have to offer.
Man, it sounds like hunger is what you need, like, to open the door. Because those are a lot of like side doors, back doors, jumping through the windows, right? It's non-conventional, but if you want it, you got to go for it. For all of you who are just jumping on this live, this is Korey Harris of The Transition, my man Jose Colorado. He is breaking down all things overseas, helping you guys if you're already playing overseas, understand how you can, of course, extend your career. And those of you who have not been able to make the jump just yet, giving you some insight on that. I'm just going to ask like maybe one or two more questions, Jose, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A with the people in the comment section. So let's talk about what you kind of just finished on, and that's agents. Like, how does a college player who's getting to the end of the season, right? Because it's January. You basically can say it's time for March Madness really soon. How do they start potentially vetting agents who may be contacting them, or if they don't have, any agents contacting them because they play Division II, Division III, NAIA, how would they go about selecting the right type of agent that can help them get overseas?
I would say when it comes to agents, you really have to understand, and you should tailor it specifically to your own player profile. So when it comes to agents, I wouldn't necessarily just be like shooting off my message to anyone, because the thing is with agents that I think a lot of people don't know or realize is that it's really easy to become a FIBA agent, actually. Okay. All you need to do is you need to pass a licensing test and you need to pay a yearly fee. So that means that you don't need to take an internship. You don't need to have previous knowledge in the market. You don't need to be a previous pro coach. You don't need to be a previous pro player. You could literally just be a McDonald's worker on Monday, take the next licensing test, and boom, you're a FIBA agent. But does that mean that you'll have connections in the market? Does that mean you'll be plugged up? Does that mean you'll understand any of the markets or the leagues or how they work or how you can get someone overseas? Not at all.
Right.
So that's why I feel like players, you have to be more selective with your agents. And for me personally, what I would do is I would tailor it specifically to the market that I would want to be in. So for me, when I did it, because I knew that my start and I was playing in Latin America, I was playing in El Salvador, that was the agents who I was primarily reaching out to. I wasn't reaching out to European agents because they don't mess with Latin America. They're not about Latin America. They're doing what they're doing over there. Yeah. So I would reach out to agents in Latin America, Argentina, Colombia, Dominican Republic, these type of areas, Mexico, these type of areas specifically for me, because it would tailor it for me. And also you have to match it to your player profile in the sense of what your college level was. Did you play? Does this agent only represent D1 players, like high major D1 players? If they're representing NBA guys, then obviously I'm not reaching out to that agent because I'm a small college guy who no one knows. Right. So you have to understand, who are they representing? What leagues do they work in? How professionalized are they? Because like I said, sub agents do it full time. And if they do it full time, they'll probably have a website, they'll probably have an email, they'll probably have multiple different agencies that they're working with. Other guys will just have a simple email. They'll be like josecolorado@gmail.com, and that's it. And you can tell that they're probably going to be a starter agency in that way. Not saying that's bad or good, but just saying that that's obviously going to impact the power of that agent in the market. So there's multiple different things that you can look at when it comes to an agent. And that would be the first thing, is you actually have to vet it, and you have to understand, like, what's the vision that you have for your career. And a lot of players will just say, I just want to get overseas wherever. Well, it's like, yeah, I guess that works to an extent, but also you probably have some advantages to your game because everyone has a unique game, right? Some guys, taller guys, they're better in Asia because the demographics of Asia are smaller. So they look for tall guys out there. Whereas guards, or like good point guards, good floor generals, they're really good in Africa because there's already a lot of big players in Africa, and they really just need some guy to like set them up and organize everything. So you're always going to have some sort of advantage to your game. And some guys, right? Some guys are more athletic, one-on-one. Latin America might be an option there, or the Middle East, or in Europe, say like you're more of a team guy, or that's how you've played your whole life in that system type of style. So there's many different ways that you can look at an agent, but that would be some of the questions I would start asking myself if I was reaching out to agents as a new player.
Man, if you guys have not given Jose a follow yet, I don't know if you're high, drunk, both of them together, make sure you do that. All right, let's open it up to some questions. So Marlon, I can't pronounce your last name. He says, how would you categorize different countries in terms of entry level to most competitive, to lowest paying, to highest paying, almost like a power ranking? Good question. Good question.
Very good question. So I would say in general, as we're going to talk in generalities, I would say Asia and the Middle East, these are I essentially call them like closed off markets. So these are like veteran veteran resumes, big resumes, former NBA guys, high major D1 guys. It's really hard to get into those markets unless you have that type of resume and you have that type of pull. In other words, you have to be experienced. So it's going to be really rare that a rookie is going to get into leagues like that. Whereas if you're going to somewhere like Europe, provided you're not in the top levels of Europe, if you're in the beginner levels, let's say third, fourth, fifth division, then that's going to be a good starter market for a lot of players, because as a rookie, you can start at those low levels and then climb up the ladder. Yeah. And then some leagues, some regions are going to have a combination of both. Like in Latin America, we can look at Central America as a beginner or starter league. El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, those are all kind of like starter leagues. Whereas if you go to somewhere like Brazil or Argentina, in the first and second divisions is more established, because those are some of the best basketball markets in that whole region. So it can vary within the region, but I would say look at Asia and the Middle East as kind of like veteran markets. Then you can look at South America or the Americas as a combination of both. And then Australia as a combination of both. Really outside of the NBL, it's going to be a lot of kind of mid or starter leagues in Australia and Oceania. And then Africa is going to be more of an established market for the most part too. If they're going to bring an import in, it's going to be someone who they know can deliver. And then obviously they have the BAL as well, the Basketball African League, which is huge now. So that's how I would kind of categorize them.
Great answer. Great answer. That was a great question too, Marlon. So this question is from DeFior74. He asked, how long do you think playing at the regional level would require, or how long do you need to play at the regional level in order to then move up to a higher level? So you're in a starter league and you're trying to get to a national league.
Well, for that one, it would obviously be very player dependent, right? Because we can't look at how good he is, his skill set, his age also may be a factor as well. But I would say that it really will depend on the country as well, because for instance, we can look at like Australia. They have the NBL 1, right, where it's a national league, but it's essentially like a regional league because it's split into five different zones. So there's NBL 1 South, North, East, West, Central, and it's really hard for an NBL 1 team to actually, an NBL 1 import or foreigner or player to actually move up to the NBL. Okay. So like there's some leagues like that where it's actually quite difficult to move up to the national league, provided I'm speaking from a foreigner point of view right now, not a national. Nationals move up, of course, all the time, but sometimes it's hard to do that. For instance, like in Puerto Rico, it's the same instance with the BSN. If you're in the second division, it's pretty hard to move up to that first division as an importer. I would say damn near like almost impossible to do that. Yeah. You're going to get really established guys. So I would say that if you're trying to move up though, as a general principle, get your film right, get the stats right, network daily. And then also if you ever are if you feel like you're stuck in a certain regional league and you can't move up, there's still other ways that you can make your play-in lucrative or make it profitable for you, because you can get a side hustle, you can coach on the side. And I'm assuming that in this instance, you would still have most of your accommodations paid for as well. So you'd be saved and in bankroll and everything. So I wouldn't necessarily look at it as like a demotion or like, I can't move up, but there is still a way to like make a viable career path or viable future for yourself.
Yeah. And a lot of guys, if I'm not mistaken, Jose, they make lateral moves sometimes in order to move up, or they even take a step back at times where they might take less money, but this particular league has more of upward mobility. So, Forever Franchise, my guy, he said, how do you go about determining the best market for yourself? So I guess he's trying to make sure that his game fits wherever he has the opportunity to maybe play.
Mm-hmm. I would say the way to determine the best market for yourself would be first to look at your nationality. Whatever that is, that's the league or that's the market that I would try to get into. So for instance, me as a Salvadorian, that was the market that I looked into, was playing in El Salvador. If I was Mexican, I would look into the Mexican market. If I was Brazilian, I would look into the Brazilian market. So that would be the first way. But outside of that, in terms of playing style, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but if you're a one-on-one player or individual player or really super talented, just going by yourself as a scorer, you would look at somewhere like the Middle East, somewhere like Africa, somewhere like Latin America. Those would be the three regions for that. Whereas if you're more of a team player, you work better in team concepts, moving off the ball, swinging the ball, then that would probably be in Europe or in Australia or Oceania would be that. And then in North America too, you could look in hypothetically at some of these North American professional or semi-professional leagues, and for the most part, that would be like a more athletic type of scorer, someone who can do both. It's a combination of both, I would say, for that. So that's how I would kind of look at the different markets.
Great answer. Great answer. So I want to make sure everybody knows I'm trying to go to different people each time. So some of you who have follow-up questions, apologies. We got to make sure a few new people get their questions off. What is your best piece of advice for players looking to make overseas a career rather than just a one and done contract?
Definitely my best piece of advice for that would be that it sounds counterintuitive, but I would say you have to get a side hustle if you want to make this a career, because that's going to help you in the early stages of your basketball playing career. Because for the most part, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of players are going to start out in that low salary range. And what I've actually seen, Korey, a lot is that a lot of players, they'll come in, they do well, right? And they automatically expect that there's going to be a second contract offer that comes.
Right.
And sometimes not only is there may be a second contract offer, but sometimes there isn't. But if it does come, sometimes it'll be like in the same salary range. Like say, for instance, you're making $800 and the second contract is $900, which doesn't really move the needle for you at all. So then what happens is that washes out a lot of players from overseas basketball, because after a while they're getting up in age and they're only making $1,200, $1,300, $1,400. And they say, I can't keep on doing this. So I have to quit and I eventually have to get a real job. Yeah. So that's why I say that you have to get a side hustle and you have to somehow build some sort of skill alongside your playing career as well. Because for me, for instance, like even when I was only making $1,500, I was still making like $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000 on the side because I had a side hustle that I was doing as well. And I'm not paying for any housing because all the accommodations are paid for as well. So there's like a way that you can make it profitable and you don't stress about it anymore, because then you can just keep on building your career. But to be honest, a lot of times what happens is that it's not even about like they get washed out because of their on-court performance. Sometimes that obviously does happen, but a lot of times it's that financial aspect, because it's like a cultural shock to them that they don't understand. This is what you're walking into, is these contracts that are so low. So there has to be a way that you have to be able to like support yourself in those beginning years. Yeah,
being broke overseas is completely different from being broke in America. I can say that from personal experience. Being broke in China, living off, $1,200 a month was not the move. So I know that's another podcast for a different time. Last question, Jose. So this is from No Limit League 4. Is the TBL, so like the semi-pro leagues that we have here in America, ABA, like that, is the TBL a good start for someone who hasn't played overseas and is still trying to find a way to get their foot in the door?
Yeah, I would say with the TBL, you have to like have realistic expectations with the TBL, because the TBL is so, I believe there's like over 40 teams now or something in the TBL. So anytime there's that many teams, it's going to be watered down to a certain extent, because you can even look at even the NBA. There's only, I think, 31 teams, right? Or 30 teams in the NBA?
32.
32 teams in the NBA, the best league in the world, the most profitable basketball league in the world, and they have 32 teams. So if the TBL has 40 plus teams, that should tell you something, that it's going to be to some extent watered down. Now, is there good teams in the TBL? Of course, there's like Albany, there's Syracuse. There's these teams that are established, that provide good film for you, that can give you good stats, good connections. But when you look at kind of like the semi-pro scene in general in the US, I would look at it more as something as for exposure, to getting your start, to getting film, to getting back into the experience of playing basketball within a team and within a team concept that you can then like leverage and parlay that to overseas teams. Because a lot of times I think people come into these leagues and they think, how much money am I going to get? But they didn't pay me on time, and this and this and this and that. And I just think in my head, like, that should never be the first priority, even playing in these leagues, in my opinion, at least. Now, the TBL traditionally, now it's molded with the BSL, which is the Basketball Super League. And traditionally, they actually had good access to Latin American leagues. Like in Mexico, they had good access to it. And I think in Chile, they used to have good access to it. So I think when you're playing in the TBL, it would be like those type of leagues that would maybe be most beneficial to look at is like Latin American leagues versus playing in a European league or somewhere else. So that would kind of be my advice for it. But I do think like people have to, and players have to taper their expectations on a league like that.
Man, super dope. So many gems. If you guys love this, if you're here, please drop a flame emoji in the chat. Drop something in the chat, man, because Jose was doing nothing but giving you guys free game. Jose, thank you so much again for your time, my man. If there's an opportunity for us to do a part two, please let me know. I think the people, they know that this is something they need, right? I mean, look at that. Look at the reactions right now, right? You got people asking for more Q&A. Guys, he's a busy man. We got a lot going on in Canada as well as here in Atlanta, Georgia. So we wanted to just kind of give you guys the tip of the iceberg, get this thing started. Hopefully we will be back. Make sure you follow Jose. Make sure you follow the transition. Much love to you guys. God bless. Tuning out.
Thank you,
Yes,
Korey.
sir.
Take care.